Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael Hayes. I'm the Global Head of Renewables in KPMG. I'd like to thank the previous speaker. And now we're going to have a panel where we're going to talk about the renewable energy industry and the deployment of renewables and how we integrate renewables into the distribution and transmission system. We're going to talk about artificial intelligence, energy efficiency, possibly blockchain, virtual power plants. And we're really going to figure out where do we take the renewable energy industry next? How do we get it to the final customer? We all are aware of the whole issue of the variability of renewable power. So I'm going to be joined by a wonderful panel who are going to debate all of these issues. Could I invite the panel to join me on stage, please? Thank you. So to begin with, we have 30 minutes for this session. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to just give a brief introduction, explain their own business background, and then we're going to get into a full discussion on smart grids, on other forms of technology that can help us deliver this renewable revolution that is going on. I'd like to start with Carrie Adler. Carrie, could you just give a brief introduction of who you are and your company, please?
Yes, hi. My name's Carrie Adler. I'm the president and CEO of SkyPower Global. We are a developer of utility-scale solar, and we focus on developing markets where we can make an impact. Our business is centered around going to countries and delivering the first power as opposed to replacement power. We focus exclusively on solar. We don't make anything. We develop, build, own, and operate around the world.
Dr. Mahat from GE, representing the Mahat region, which is an expression I hadn't heard previously. Do you want to give us a brief description and particularly talk about what GE is doing in this region?
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Manar Al-Manif. I run the GE Renewable business in the Mahat region, which is the Middle East, North Africa, and Turkey. GE is one of the largest renewable energy companies around the globe in terms of scope. We start all the way from the development, all the way to technology provision in onshore, offshore, hybrid, as well as grid connectivity with long-term service as well. Our aim is to try to implement as much renewable energy that we can do, something that can support the growth of the different economies around the world over here and reduce the carbon dioxide emission rates.
Okay, thank you. Thirdly, I'd like to turn to Jean-Francois Chartrain. Do you want to give a brief description of yourself and your company, who I know is presenting here as well at the conference?
Sure, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jean-Francois Chartrain. I'm Chief Operating Officer of Tabrid. Tabrid is a district cooling company created 21 years ago in UAE, and we operate 78 networks in the GCC, in 5 GCC countries. And with a presence in India as well. District cooling is a critical infrastructure in GCC because of the climate, and we provide a sustainable and very efficient solution to cool high density developments and also some remote areas as well.
Thank you, Jean-Francois. Last but not least, my good friend Yuan from Eversheds.
Hi, thank you, Mike. My name's Yuan Walters. I'm a partner, Evershed Sutherland. I head up the clean energy team for the MENA region. Evershed Sutherland is an international law firm. We're advising on clean energy projects throughout the globe. We advise on utility-size projects down to distributed energy projects. And we can hopefully today draw on some of the comparisons between the MENA market and some of the other markets that we're all operating on to see how things are done differently.
Great, thank you all, and we will be inviting the audience to raise any questions either during the session or at the very end. We leave a couple of minutes. Maybe Carrie, hi Carrie, maybe if I begin with you, can you talk a little bit about the type of technologies we're seeing, including smart grids and other similar technologies, to help us get renewable power onto the grid and to the final consumer?
I'll try to use non-artificial intelligence. My scope is really within solar. But solar energy is not construction. It is an assembly project. It's taking solar panels, which are rather ubiquitous. And the beautiful part about solar is it provides the poorest of humanity, the light poorest of humanity, with an opportunity to be part of society, to have a chance to read, go to school, and contribute. And we believe that solar not only is the fastest technology, renewable technology that you can implement, but it's also the most cost-effective, has a long lifespan, requires minimal maintenance and service. The challenge is getting it there. If you don't have the patience or the time to wait for those transmission lines to be built, then solar energy is truly the only form of distributed energy that makes sense for the people that live in the dark, that deserve the chance to have a light in their future. So that's where we really focus. And adopting various forms of technologies, from inverters to robotic cleaning, that's really around utility scale. What we're finding is that starting with the basic needs of providing solar panels that translate into energy during the daylight hours is the beginning.
And as we develop new technologies and as the wind industry gets better and better at integrating into the grid, do you think that represents a long-term threat to the solar industry?
We exited wind in 2009 because the challenge that we saw is whether it's a 1.5 or 1.6 megawatt turbine or a 5 megawatt turbine, it's hard enough to install that in a large city or offshore, but it doesn't address 80% of the people today who are living in the dark, who need just basic power in their villages. So there is a need for wind. I believe wind does belong offshore, where it can deliver large amounts of power across large geographic areas, and that's for the large cities. As it relates to the villages and the people who deserve the power the most to have a chance to be part of society, that's where solar's future lies.
Okay, thank you, Carrie. Manar, I'm going to turn to you and get a GE perspective. I mean, GE has been one of the great players in this industry for many years and at the forefront of some of the most important technological developments, and particularly the growing size of turbines that GE, amongst others, keep building. I'd like to get your perspective really on what more can we do, what more can GE do to help us get renewables into a distributed grid system out to the final consumer?
I think so. One of the things that we need to first address is the power demand that we're seeing not only around the globe, but specifically in this region. There is nearly 1 billion person around the world that doesn't have access to power. And there is an immense need to introduce new sorts of power. Equally, you need to introduce more efficient, cost-effective sources of power. And that's where renewable was a game changer in the entire region today. Today, when you look at renewable, it's more cost-effective than conventional, surprisingly in a region that is producing oil. And the case has been proving. The question now, how can we take it to the next step to make sure renewable can be a baseload that will translate and give the comfort to everyone? Now, as a technology providing, we're doing our best to invest and increase our investment in NPI development and technology development to make sure we introduce more efficient, cost-effective turbines that will be able to generate more electricity. But equally, there is another area where how can we make sure we have a strong infrastructure base in terms of developers that will be able to start developing projects very fast. So as the technology ramp up, the demand for power increases, there is people that are interested to take the lead on the development. How can we make sure that we have a robust regulation that will allow us to be moving on the same speed with technology development? Today, one of the challenges that we're facing is that technology is moving in a very fast pace. There is a new turbine coming out every 18 months. But the problem, can you use that new turbine for your new project today? So we need to make sure that we implement state-of-the-art laws and regulation that will cover the risk of everyone, but will allow you to compete most effectively. In addition, we need to open the market into a new direction. The entire energy ecosystem is going to change in the next 5 years. You're not going to see the traditional players remain on the top. It's going to change dramatically. And we need to open new business models such as private PPAs and others to allow this industry to flourish.
So I want to go back on one or 2 points you've raised, and in particular this idea that GE can keep building bigger, better, and ultimately cheaper turbines, which is fantastic, and I've seen the impact this has had on the offshore wind industry. I'm mesmerized, however, by your point that government and regulation is acting as an inhibitor. Why is that, and what can we do to actually change this? Because it seems in this era when we need to do everything we possibly can on the climate change agenda, we should let something like this slow down the growth of this incredible industry.
Well, see, the entire renewable industry, if you look at it in our part of the world, is in the new early stages. It's not a very sophisticated industry. It's just in the beginning. And that's a normal process for people to feel comfortable and start introducing and updating the rules and regulation. If you think about it, I think so over 8 years ago, when you start speaking about renewable, everyone around the room would think you lost your mind because it didn't make sense. Solar was 12 times more expensive, wind was 10 times more expensive, and people were looking at you, why would I even look at this? Today, the technology is being proven. The cost is dramatically down, is more competitive than conventional. It's around 50% in some countries, and I'm not only speaking in the oil importing countries, I'm also speaking in the oil exporting countries. So it makes sense. The only step that today we're still worried about the regulation, about the risk. What should we look at it? As an example, in one of the countries we're working in, because of the rigid regulation, actually their project is just moving. They will have turbines that are nearly 7 to 8 years old by the time they're online. And no one needs to have that because as the technology is developing, you're having more efficient, more productive turbines that will generate better energy. That means your annual production is going to be higher. Therefore, as a developer, your IRR is going to be better. So it's a win-win solution for everyone. But how can we create that comfort for the regulators to make sure that they create regulations that will allow people to be more competitive, adhere to the requirement, but open to technology? That's the mindset that we need to move with.
So the second thing that you said that caught my attention was private PPAs, and we all come from different parts of the world. It's one of the great things about this conference, and certainly I do a lot of work with global corporations who, as a result of various pressures, it's the ESG agenda, it's employees, are doing whatever they can to decarbonize, and moving from brown power to green power is becoming one of the easiest and most implementable solutions in other parts of the world. Talking to you in advance of the session, I get the impression private PPAs represents a big challenge in this particular region.
Indeed. It's present in some markets in this region, and it's moving in fast pace because over here you're not waiting for regulation or for government offtake. You're having private developers that is securing offtake based on needs and developing it. It allowed to have a more robust business environment that you look at it. It's developed in some countries, which is like 10% of the region. It needs to be developed further because it can create new vehicles for development. That is much better and much more faster if you think about it. It's not where it needs to be, but I think so this is the new wave that we're going to see happening in this part of the world.
Yeah, my own perspective is we have seen nothing yet in private PPAs. We very much think it's where the world is going, and it's really going to be something we're going to have to deal with and work out all the different challenges. It's not straightforward to implement a PPA in any situation.
But it's working in some countries. If you look at it as an example in Morocco, it's working perfectly because it makes sense for them, and it's the structure of the market. And you need to look at it from one market to the other. At the end of the day, as I mentioned, when you look at the entire energy ecosystem, and we might have a bit of a disagreement over here on it, I'm not sure you're going to see at the end of the day the large utility scale are going to remain in the front seat running the show. Mm-hmm. The entire energy sector is changing. You're seeing decentralization of power. You're going to see more democratization, more distribution. The end customer is the end user. So that's causing a lot of changes. And with the new development that we see with electric vehicles and so on, there have to be a major change in the way that you produce power and the way you consume it, as well as the way you distribute it.
I couldn't agree more. I think the balance of power has shifted to the consumer and away from the utility, and I think it's incumbent on utilities to figure out what role they're going to play in this new world, because a whole industry has grown up around them and they've been late to it. Now, there's some wonderful utilities around the world, but they have a long way to go. And in particular, this issue of distributed power is really going to cause big challenges for utilities.
I agree with you.
And I know you wanted to jump in there.
So in this part of the world, that's what needs to happen, but it's not happening. So in other parts of the world, you see an environment where the consumer has got a huge amount of choice of where and how to buy power. And on a click of an app, you can change who provides you with power. And for an example, there are many countries in Europe that allow a consumer that choice. In this part of the world, that choice does not exist. So you buy your power from one supplier only at the moment. That, I think, will change. And that's the way the market and the world is moving. On the private PPA side, at the moment, certain countries allow wheeling. So you can produce power in this part of the country, and then a buyer of power can buy it in this part of the country, and you wheel the power. So in Jordan, for example, you can do that. In Saudi Arabia, for example, at the moment, and here, you cannot do that. So their regulation needs to change to enable the private PPA market to play a significant part in our power production. And at the moment, I don't think that's happening for a number of reasons, but control of the market is one of them, and the current suppliers still want to maintain that control, and that eventually will change, I think, but it's a slow process.
And I mean, this is a really important point. I can't see a private PPA market taking off if wheeling isn't allowed in places like Saudi Arabia. I mean, do you really think change is going to come, and will it come quickly?
Yes, we're told that change is coming, and I believe that. I'm told draft regulations are in place, and the momentum in somewhere like Saudi now there's great momentum with a number of developments and significant stakeholders really trying to put pressure on the regulators in Saudi to bring in the wheeling regulation. And if they want to hit the extremely large targets they've put in place in Saudi, their REPTA will play its part, PIF will play its part, but wheeling has to play its part. So other developers like SABIC can play a part in delivering those targets. They've got a target of 4 gigawatts of clean energy power, and that can only be delivered through wheeling.
And you've obviously come from a European background as well. Can you compare how we're looking at all this in Europe with the local region here? Because it seems in Europe we're much more advanced. We have smart grids. There's a long way to go in smart grids yet. But they're developing and developing quickly. It seems there's a journey to be traveled in this region.
Yeah, one of the changes that we talked about on how do you control from an artificial intelligence and technology perspective, and what are the differences? And in the European market, there's a lot more installed capacity, and the project's a lot smaller. So what we see there at the moment is an environment where developers have used technology, so you will see one operating center with a number of people there with access to all of their assets throughout that particular region or country, and that they control those assets and the O&M side of it electronically from there. And I think that's definitely the way that the market will go. That has challenges in this part of the world because lots of the projects here that have been procured demand a localization, and they demand a localization not only in the EPC phase but also in the O&M phase. And that will have challenges because to do things at world record pricing, which this region is driving towards, then that means you have to do things as efficiently as possible. And that will have challenges with those aspects around localization and trying to get local labor involved on the O&M side particularly.
Okay. Jean-Francois, I want to turn the discussion in a slightly different direction. You very much come from an energy efficiency background. Talk to me a little bit about energy efficiency in this region. My personal perception is that energy efficiency is one of the great solutions for climate change, but it is vastly, vastly underutilized, which I can't understand because unlike some of the other decarbonization solutions, energy efficiency saves money for corporations.
Yeah, absolutely. And energy efficiency is here in the region is a very important step to achieve the 2030 goals and the 2050 also energy target for UAE. Not only decarbonization of the energy production will enable that, but also energy efficiency and energy conservation measures. There is a lot to do. It's an emerging market, and with the regulator is starting to work on the framework to enable energy conservation measures, probably starting with the cooling industry, because here in the region most of the electricity consumed, especially during summer, is used for cooling. So there is a lot to do on the demand side management, and the regulator is starting to work on it, and we are having targets now to work on. The whole industry, not only the district cooling industry, but also the traditional cooling industry, is working to provide a more efficient solution, is working also with new technology like business analytics, artificial intelligence. We are personally in Tabrid, we are testing many solutions to improve the way we produce energy, the way we distribute energy, and we are working also to help our customer to reduce their energy consumption, to better use cooling energy. This is very important. We will not achieve the goals without producing better, with a better efficiency, and also without educating our customer to better use cooling. It's coming. This new technology are helping us in a very, very fast manner.
And do you find it a hard sell to customers? Do you need to convince them that it's worthwhile making the capital investment to implement energy efficiency solutions, or do you find that they resist and it takes a long period from an initial discussion to actually getting them on board?
It takes time. It takes time also because the tariff structure of electricity in the Gulf does not help very much to support energy conservation or energy efficiency measures. With the regulator in UAE, we are currently talking about time of use tariff, and that will help our customers to use air conditioning at the best moment of the day. The technology, the cooling technology, enable to shift a little bit the demand and the production. It requires still some work from the regulator to adapt to the market, the electricity market.
Okay, thank you, Jean-Francois. I want to turn back to the technology discussion again and a couple of other topics I'd like to cover. One keeps hearing about battery, and battery is the future, particularly as we deal with the intermittency of renewables, and I hear the wind industry talk about batteries. But Carrie, most of all, I hear solar plus battery as the way to go. Interested in your perspective on this, and why do you think people seem to believe in solar plus battery much more than wind plus battery, if it's a fair statement? I'll get to Mahat to comment as well.
Yeah, I'll leave the wind to General Electric. Look, it's simple. I mean, if you look at the words of the board behind me, I mean, that is, in another way, the only climate change mitigation strategy that the world really has. Population growth alone will account for any efficiency savings that result from people who want to make an effort to reduce the amount of energy they're using. But if you look at the population statistics, a year ago I sat in this room, or one nearby, and I was told by someone at the UN that they expect by 2050 there'll be 650 million people in Africa without power. And that's a sobering thought. Storage works. It's here today. The storage is here today. The cost of solar is at a price today that storage and solar can work. So I question the logic, and I'm open to any suggestions, but why integrate multiple forms of technology if you can store all the energy that the sun generates in a day and release it during the night? If the sun does not shine in some regions, although here most days you have sun, if it doesn't shine, then you just have more batteries. But batteries today have the ability to store enough energy to run cities, large cities, small cities, little villages. And we believe that the magic number is 5 to 6 cents. And the key to storage technology is one thing and one thing only: it's ice.
You've just put GE out of business there.
They solve their wind turbine.
We can definitely do it. look, when you're speaking about it, I think so the main aim that everyone is thinking about is there is a lot of development in technology, both if you look at it from the solar as well as the wind, offshore, hydro, and others. The main question is how can you reach to a renewable baseload? And look, storage is there today. The price of storage have dropped significantly in the last 12 months, but still very expensive. And if you think about it from an LCOE perspective, it is still very expensive. You can use and combine multiple sources of renewable energy that will help you to do it. So today, if you think about it, solar actually hit your grid for 4 to 5 hours, just like a big shot once. And before that, there is nothing. After that, there is nothing. If there is a cloud, it just goes down. And if you have wind together with solar as an example, you can use the best out of both resources. You can have the wind in the early hours of the morning, the solar where it makes sense, the wind at the late hours of the night, and you can add a bit of storage. At the end of the day, you need to make sure, if we're speaking about technology and we're speaking about price, if you're speaking about price and competitiveness from an LCE perspective, solar and storage alone is not going to solve, because you would require huge amount of storage, and with today's cost, this is not going to help with the economics. However, if you integrate and use multiple sources of technology and add storage where it makes sense, that can be a case. And surprisingly, in our part of the world, there are some regions that solar makes sense and wind doesn't, and other regions that wind make more sense than solar. And we need to think about it not only from how much megawatt are we implementing, but equally how much are we taking out of that into the grid. So how much of the 100 megawatt you're installing is going actually on the grid? And this is one of the things that we need to change the way that we look at it. And today, GE committed that we're going to be carbon neutral by end of 2020. We're really taking this to the heart. We're saying that we're going to be implementing this across everything that we do, and start by how can we introduce more technologies together that make sense. It's all on the business case, I guess.
Jean-Francois and Yuan, any comments on this topic?
Maybe one comment from the district energy industry. This industry enable also to use a different kind of storage. We can see all around the world. For example, in Netherlands, they use geothermal storage to use the surplus of renewable energy. There are some projects in the region to use ice storage instead of batteries, or mainly instead of batteries, to use this excess of energy. It can be designed only at a precinct base, on a precinct base or district based. So a small scale, but the district energy industry in the world has demonstrated that other sources of storage are affordable.
Okay.
I think for storage to be deployed on a large scale globally, it needs to be able to attract project financing, and at the moment that's not in place. I think there are a different variety of storage solutions in the market, which makes it harder for funders to understand. I think if you look at solar and wind, there are a set amount of suppliers of the products that can attract project financing, and they've got a track record of attracting that project financing. I think with storage at the moment, it's still a new concept and a new technology, but once storage is cracked, it will fundamentally change the whole energy market, and you'll use it with solar, wind, and it'll be a fundamental shift in the market.
Yeah, it's funny what you say about funding. I mean, investors, as we know, will take wind and solar assets all day long, but I'm actually seeing investors really starting to embrace battery and storage as an investable asset class. We're now seeing some listed yieldcos focused solely on battery assets. So that's an indication of where this market is going. I know we're running out of time. We've only 2 minutes left and very little time to discuss all these topics. I want to touch on one other topic that's very close to my own heart, and something we're seeing a lot in Europe, and certainly a lot of talk about, and now very much becoming a reality, and that's interconnection cross-border. So can I ask each of the panelists just to give me a brief comment on, do you believe in the concept of cross-border export of power through various subsea cables or cross-land cables, and are we seeing it as a realistic possibility in this region?
Yes, we are seeing it, and it's definitely the way forward. There's interconnectors from North Africa into Europe within this region. So, for example, Jordan has got too much capacity now and is looking to export. Then if you look at the European market, some of the offshore sites that have been built around the UK, they're actually closer to some of the other European countries. So they're talking about interconnectors to other European countries, from Ireland to the UK. So it's definitely there. It will definitely stay, and it is the future, yes.
I agree with that. And you can see that in the mandate of every country that you go to. This is part of their strategy, that they're producing this amount of power. Some of it is going to be for local consumption, and the others are going to be for export. And I think so they're drafting some kind of regulation that will allow this trade-off between countries. The GCC started this, and the Arab League as well is starting this.
One of the most fascinating developments in my world has been watching the UK offshore wind market. A number of very significant utilities failed in some of the recent auction processes, didn't get a special subsidy or a tariff, and have yet made a decision to build unsubsidized offshore wind because they believe in two things. They believe the merchant market will take off and that they will make money in the merchant market, and they couple that with the possibilities around interconnection, that the market is no longer just mainland UK, the market is continental Europe.
Yeah, I think the energy is just pure economics. Let's just say solar and wind with a battery today was 10 cents. If a wind turbine is designed for a 20, 25-year life and a solar panel is designed for a 30, 35-year life, in 10 years from now, that 10 cents is really 5 cents. So if you do the math, I mean, money doubles every 7 years. You want to say every 10 years? The cost of renewable energy with storage today is affordable today, because you could invest in energy today. And you know what? If GE wants to be carbon neutral by the end of 2020, I hope you're ready to sign some private PPAs.
Well, we are, and we started.
We'd be happy to provide you with some solar energy to help your cause.
Wind is better.
Okay, well listen, I have a voice in my ear telling me we've already exceeded our time, so thank you very much for participating in the session. I'd like to thank each of my panelists, Carrie, Manar, Jean-Francois and Yuan, for their brilliant contributions, and thank you. Thanks very much.